Proper way to light a cigar. This is called the burner, and it is awesome. First, you start by toasting. You never want to you don't want to burn up the cigar. So now that you've kind of toasted the end pretty well, what you're going to do is you're going to take a draw, and I'm going to hold the flame about an inch away from it. Pulling the air through is actually going to draw the flame to the cigar.
This episode of Bourbon Pursuit is made possible through listeners like you, supported through Patreon, and with partnerships brought to you by the following. If you want the perfect button-down shirt that fits right and doesn't look cheap, then you need to visit Leadberry. Leadberry offers high-quality apparel with easy returns and top-notch customer service. Visit leadberry.com/bourbon, LEDBURY.com/bourbon, and use coupon code BOURBON at checkout to get 20% off your first order. Are you looking for a stellar wristwatch that isn't boring and overpriced? Vincero has a modern and contemporary style that looks bold and professional. Get 15% off all of Vincero's stunning collection using promo code BOURBON at getthewatch.net. Hey everyone, this episode will close out 2017, and if I must say myself, this is a fantastic episode, especially for someone like me who knows nothing about cigars and wants to pair them with some good bourbon. It's been something that you all have asked for, so I'm glad we're able to make this happen. Thank you, as always, to our Patreon supporters. 2017 was a monumental year of growth for our listener base, as well as people helping sponsor this podcast. I hope that our monthly giveaways, the t-shirts, the koozies, and more all make it worth it. If you're looking to support more of your favorite entertainment that comes from two guys in Kentucky trying to keep this time-sucking hobby going in 2018, take the opportunity to help support this podcast. Visit patreon.com, patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit, and choose a monthly donation amount that works for you. We really do appreciate all of our fans out there, especially those who also take the time and write iTunes reviews and get their friends to listen to this podcast. As a reminder, please fill out our audience survey. It only takes 3 minutes and gets you entered to win a $50 Amazon gift card. Go to bourbonpursuit.com/survey and select all the brands that you've learned about because of this show. With that, enjoy this week's episode. Welcome back to an episode of the Bourbon Pursuit Podcast, the official podcast of bourbon. Today we are doing something that's actually it's a first. We've been on this location before, which is my house, which
our
is my
official studio.
Yeah, but we're actually outside today, so apologies if you're going to hear some cars going by, some weed eaters, maybe an airplane every once in a while. But this is something that I don't necessarily have the opportunity to do in my basement because I don't have a huge HVAC unit down there, right? We've already started smoking cigars, and this was something that, we had a lot of people, they said, I want to kind of understand, talk a little bit about bourbon and cigar pairing. And
you see the Pappy bottle, and you see everybody thinks, immediately thinks bourbon cigars are a match made in heaven.
And they're right.
Yeah, they're right. And us two amateurs, we've dabbled or maybe smoked a cigar here or there, but we have absolutely no clue about cigars. So that's why I think this episode is going to be really cool.
Yeah, and this is not only that is one of the people that we have on here is a Patreon supporter of the show. He's actually won a giveaway 1 month as well. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests today. So today we have Jake Glancy and Jeremy Kendrick. Jake is the owner of Jake's Cigar Bar in Lexington, Kentucky, and Jeremy, manager, I assume, right?
Yep.
So, fellas, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having us, Kenny.
So, before we kind of get it kicked off right here, and, we'll talk about cigars here in a minute, but kind of talk a little bit about maybe, your journey into bourbon. Was it cigars that led you there? Was it your grandpa that led you into bourbon? Was it just hey, what was it? So
who wants to go first?
Jake, we'll start with you, man.
All right, bourbon or cigars?
We'll start with bourbon.
Bourbon.
Bourbon was, you had it pretty much right. It was my grandfather. He was kind of he's still alive. We went on a fishing trip for his 93rd birthday. But during the summers, I would go up to his house in Ashland, Kentucky. My grandmother was in a nursing home. She was battling Alzheimer's, so she was in the home, and he was home alone. So I'd go up there for weeks at a time and just hang out and learn. He was retired at that point and everything. But one day, I don't know what age, he said, well, you want to try what I got? And I was like, well, sure, grandfather.
Whatever that is.
And, he pulls out a jug of Kentucky Tavern, 175 classic of Kentucky Tavern.
Was he in a fraternity?
I don't know. Maybe in the 20s. He was in the Army, does that count? But
that was my go-to. I think that's why he brought that up.
But so he poured me some Kentucky Tavern and Sprite, and we sat and had popcorn and watched Matlock or Andy Griffith or whatever version of was on at the time. And from then on, when I'd go up there, it'd be like a special treat. He'd let me have some bourbon and Sprite, and that's kind of where it all started.
Sounds like an awesome Sunday.
Yeah, I know, really.
Yeah, it was.
Jeremy, what about you, my man?
For bourbon, it was, we traveled around a lot. After I was like 7 years old, we moved around to Connecticut and Ohio, New Orleans, Key West. My parents were nurses, and we traveled. And everywhere we went, as soon as Dad told them we're from Kentucky, there were some presumptions everyone made. But if you were a friend, when we went home, they wanted Dad to bring back bourbon. And when I was 14, we were at a conference. He did an international conference. It was in California. Next year it was going to be in Kentucky. Dad was hosting us for a foster parents association. The guys from Ireland were there. And on the elevator, on a 5-minute ride, they quizzed us about bourbon. And for the first time, I recognized this is important everywhere else. It's not just, the Kentucky thing. And so anytime we moved around, I drank bourbon just because when I hit old enough to drink bourbon, it was a thing that reminded me of being back home. And so when I came back 5 or 6 years ago and all this was starting to go on, it was really cool.
Absolutely. So now let's, the real reason because we had you guys on was, today is all about cigars, right? And, you guys take care of a cigar bar in Lexington. I'm sure you have a pretty stellar bourbon selection as well, right?
Yeah, we're at 250 plus whiskeys and about 180 of them are bourbons right now.
Nice. Awesome.
Adding to it every day.
So I think this is gonna be a lot of education about cigars and pairing with bourbon and stuff like that. So first, I want to go through and talk, the basics of cigars. So talk about, types of leaves, maybe rolling techniques. I mean, when we were actually starting the show, you were talking about like different kinds of cuts. Like, let's go over just some of the basics of what you really need to know about, maybe just cigars in general for those noobs that are out there.
For novice.
Yeah. I'll start with cutters. Everybody talks about cutters. Everybody thinks, and I've done everything from biting off the end of it to stabbing a golf tee in it. I mean, sometimes you just got to do what you got to do to get the thing open. But if you have the luxury of availability of a cutter, then you're going to end up better off. But so the main cutter, the traditional old cutter, is your guillotine. Your two double-bladed. Now they're not all double-bladed, but most of them are double-bladed, and that's just a straight cut, flat cut. So what that does is, unlike his cigar where we did a flat cut, all it is just cuts off part of the cap. And you don't, the thing is, all cigars have a cap, and you don't want to go too far past the cap because the cap's what holds it all together. So then the other option is a punch. So a punch is just like a cookie cutter, like a really small cookie cutter, and you just kind of slowly stick it into the end, and it pulls out part of that cap. Punches are very nice, but also can be very cantankerous. They if you don't have a sharp punch, most likely you're gonna crack your cigar.
And the steel in a curved shape doesn't like to say
right.
Sharp,
it's not like you
long.
can hone it. It's not like you can really sharpen it or anything. So basically, it just needs to be a newer, high quality punch. So the really popular one these days is my favorite, which is a V cut. So basically, or a notch cut, but it's mainly a V cut. So what it does is it just snaps out the center of a cigar. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds, where you don't have to take the whole cap off and you don't have to judge how deep to go on the cigar where you're going to risk cutting that cap off, but you're not also dealing with delicately putting a punch in there. You still get to snap it down. There's a whole lot less thought process.
What's the advantage to like each, I guess, method or disadvantage?
So the V cut and the punch are nice because they leave a lot more of the cap intact.
Okay.
If you're the kind of person that likes to chew on cigars at all, that helps.
Okay.
It'll help it stay together. Like Jake said, it'll keep the structure of it. The advantages and disadvantages, straight cut will work on any cigar anywhere. Disadvantage, it's the easiest to mess up from the user end. V-cut is the simplest to use, almost bulletproof, only works on round cap cigars. So if you have a pigtail like that one had, we couldn't use it.
Do you have any pyramids or torpedoes over there?
Yeah, I've got a couple figurados.
Hand me one of them.
So just talk about it. Like,
So
talk
that's
about
what he's talking about. So with this is the
If it comes to a
torpedo.
fine point.
This
at
is a
one end.
torpedo, yeah. And it's basically where the cap goes to a point and not a rounded edge. So this is where he's saying you can't use a V cut. Or punch, right? Because you can't punch, obviously. But a lot of people don't know the reason that a torpedo exists, or a pyramid.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that.
Right.
Why?
A lot of people don't know. And what the actual reason is that you get to determine how much smoke you get and what kind of draw you get. You cut just a little bit off the end, you're going to have a tighter, cooler draw. It's going to be harder to pull it through. It's going to be a cooler smoke. You cut more of that cap off, you're going to get more of that airflow through, so it's going to be hotter, and it's going to be a lot more smoke at once. So it just basically determines like how you like the draw on that one. A Christoph's got a real kind of an open draw. So if you
I
wanted
like
that,
all the smoke. I like
right,
heavy hits.
you don't want to have to
I'm a
work
heavy hitter.
for it. Right, you don't want to work for it.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to work for leisure.
Yeah.
So what you do is you just cut further down on the cap. But somebody that likes that cool smoke and they're looking for it to last a lot longer, then what they'll do is they'll just cap a little bit less off the end, and that's going to give them a tight draw and a cool smoke. So that's why the torpedo.
Now talk about
exists.
different, I guess, because I'm looking at your
the array.
array of options here. So you have long, fat, short.
Oh, yeah.
All
The sizes
different
are
shapes
endless.
and sizes. What does that mean? And why would you choose one versus the other?
So cigars come in, especially nowadays, more sizes than ever. They come as short as 3.5, 4-inch cigar. When we're talking about sizes, by the way, sizes are done by length and ring gauge. So if someone says a cigar is a 6x40, it means it is 6 inches long and a 40 ring gauge. 40 ring gauge is measured in 64ths of an inch. So a 40 ring gauge is 64ths of an inch in diameter.
Show them the 70.
Yeah, but I say we go all the way up to this big guy here in the middle,
So that's
which
actually
is
the diameter is actually larger than an inch.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
it's a
Looks like a
7x70.
Right, it's like a bratwurst.
And the bigger cigars have become more popular these days. And
I don't understand.
the naming of them can be a little confusing because there is no standard of naming of size, especially to bourbon guys and Scotch guys. We have this issue. There's a lot of laws and rules about naming things. Whereas with cigars, you will have a list of names. You have classics like Robusto, a Churchill, Toro, which all tell you a generic size range, but not necessarily specific. And the size does affect it. So if you have the same cigar, that Christoph or that Romeo, and you have it in a variety of sizes, each one will taste different, even though it's the same tobacco. The reason is you're getting the ratio of the wrapper to the filler is changing, and your wrapper on the outside is what provides 80% of the flavor to a smoke. If you go into a larger ring gauge cigar, it burns cooler than a smaller ring gauge cigar. So you will change flavor that way.
Do you pick the size based on how much time you want to
The
spend?
length is pretty much time.
Okay.
Yeah. The length is based on time. The ring gauge is purely based, or a lot based on how it feels.
'Cause I
What
know-
feels
yeah.
comfortable for you to smoke
I
on.
notice when I go to my friend's house that are like, they're big cigars, and we're like, how much time do you got? And that's when they'll go
The
pick
big, long
which
ones,
cigar for what we're going to smoke.
Two
I'm like,
most
I'm like,
easily-
I got 30 minutes or I got an hour. Then they pick accordingly.
Yeah, the two most easily overlooked things and when purchasing cigars is how much time do I have to smoke? How much do I want to spend?
Yeah.
Most people don't
And how
normally
much do
think
I want my
about
head to
those.
spin?
Right. Am I okay to stand up?
And they're important because a cigar like a small nub will only run 25, 30 minutes. Whereas some of these 7x70 of that size, you're looking at an hour and a half smoke. I mean, so
Yeah.
it's not just small differences sometimes.
So that's one you want to take like on the golf course or
Right.
you're playing poker or something.
Large ring gauges for our golfers are really nice. They handle wind much better.
Okay.
Just because of the surface area of the fire you got. So boats, golfers often like large ring gauge cigars.
Gotcha.
They're a
They
little
like
less
the perceived
temperamental.
value too. I mean,
It's a great perceived value. Getting a ton of tobacco.
because
in it.
I mean the price of one that's almost half that size is only going to be a 20% difference. You know, so it's not really because the wrapper, like you said, most of the flavor from it is the cost. I mean, too, because the darker wrappers, when you talk a Maduro, it's going to take a lot more work, a lot more fermentation to get to the process of getting to that wrapper, as opposed to a lighter one is not going to be as difficult, but it still has to be a much better, higher quality tobacco usually than what's in the inside.
So you're kind of already like going into it a little bit. So talk about like what the difference in the wrappers are. You know, you're hitting on it a little
Right.
bit, but like what kind of flavors does each release when you are getting to it and stuff like that?
You start.
So without getting too crazy,
Oh no, get crazy.
well, rappers can get ridiculous.
We have a podcast about bourbon. But, we're nerdy.
It used to be simple. We started off with Cuban seeds being grown in Cuba, and then we grew Cuban seed in the Dominican Republic, and then we found out that Sumatran seed was great, but it maybe grew better in Nicaragua. So what you have now is wrapper and tobacco identified by country of origin, meaning where the seed started, and the country in which it was grown in. So a Connecticut broadleaf, which is really the only real of consequence cigar quality tobacco we grow in America. Connecticut Valley, Connecticut broadleaf, it's typically that real pale color you see there. It gives a creamy, light finish, but it is grown all sorts of places in other countries, which then after a couple of years there will impart its own flavor onto it. But generically, and this is broad generics, but when you're in a humidor, the lighter the color of the exterior wrapper, the lighter body of the flavor.
Okay.
The darker you get in cigars, the longer it is fermented, the stronger flavors you're going to start getting into chocolates and coffees and dark leather. And in the middle is typically where the safe place is for bourbon and scotch guys to play with their cigar and whiskey pairings. It's hard to mess up in that area because there's a lot of commonalities between them. When you start getting into the real dark flavors, like a Cameroon wrapper is delicious. It's got a particular texture and grain to it. It's considered a prized wrapper. But if you don't pair it with the right thing, it overpowers whatever you're drinking with. But typically, your safe spots right now, if you're new to cigars, Dominicans are usually very highly quality. Nicaragua is the new sort of hot spot of high quality. Cameroon, Ecuadorian. For very good reason. They're growing some very good stuff right now. And the Connecticut broadleaf is that exterior shade.
So what's the difference, I guess, in Kentucky or North Carolina tobacco versus these Dominican, Honduras, Nicaragua tobaccos?
Growing period.
Okay.
So you're going to get here, you're only going to have a couple months of good growing period.
One harvest.
Right. So you basically have to get it quick. Before something happens. So what you would end up doing is not able to get either the one big thing, the size. The size of the leaves. You're not trimming it and just letting the big leaves grow. You're trying to get all of it. So most of the tobacco around here is kind of more of a burley. It's ground up for cigarettes or
chewing tobacco,
pipes and chewing and all that stuff. So, but a lot more over the last couple of years, they've been working towards getting some better Kentucky tobacco for
we're finally starting to see premium
right, but it's still we're never going to be able to get the volume that we would down there because they maintain 70 year round. Right. I mean, so they're able to cultivate the fields and do all that, and where we have winters, we have seasons.
I was about to say, are you telling me there's going to be a craft cigar market or something?
Oh, that is already it's a boutique cigar market,
and it is already huge. There's actually
it's getting massive.
There's one that I'll plug them.
Go ahead.
There's a guy named Eric McAnallen that started a cigar company called Black Patch. And his cigars are not exclusively Kentucky tobacco, all right? And they're not rolled in Kentucky. So he is trying to do the absolute best way to incorporate Kentucky tobacco into a premium cigar. So a lot of his cigars, now this Kinbano is the best one he's put out so far. And so the wrapper is from Kentucky, right?
No, not the wrapper, sorry. There's parts of the filler. Right now it's a fairly low percentage from what I understand.
I thought it was the wrapper. I'm sure. Well, whatever. Either way, he cultivates tobacco up here in Kentucky and sends it down to the Dominican where they can either, if they want for that cigar to ferment it longer down in the more ideal situations, and then they roll it down there. But it does actually incorporate some Kentucky tobacco in the cigar itself.
That's interesting. So I guess I was trying to do some research for this last night and trying to read about different stuff, and apparently during the 90s there was this huge boom of really wanting hand rolled cigars. Now is that still a thing? Is that hand rolled versus machine rolled? I mean, do you know
we
a lot of the differences? We do not
sell any cigars in our humidor that are machine rolled. Your machine rolls are your Swisher Sweets, your Black and Milds, all that
Phillies,
stuff. Everything that
stuff
we
you
sell,
roll blunts with.
We have, exactly. if you do that sort of thing. But everything we have in our humidor, even down to our smaller cigars, are hand rolled, and that's really never going to changed.
So yeah, in the cigar market, you pretty much have three types of cigars: totally hand rolled, totalmente hecho a mano, totally made by hand is what you will see on the Cuban cigars. Then you will have totally machine made, which is an entirely automated process. Then you will have machine bound and hand finished. Premium cigar markets in any decent humidor are totally handmade, meaning the leaves are bunched together in tubos to start off with. Those tubos are combined to make the core. A binder is gone on that to give it the structure of that shape, and then a wrapper on that. All that, the cap is done by hand. And that is the premium cigar market today. Wasn't always that case.
So kind of like, bourbon drinkers have a progression, like they have, they mix bourbon with Coke or 7-Up, and then they have bourbon on the rocks, and they mix it with water, then they're going to neat. So kind of what is the progression with the cigar smokers? Are you working simply from light to dark, or how?
Well, not necessarily light to dark, but that is that's a simple way to put it.
Okay.
You're starting off with your lighter, like his Cafe, or this Romeo is very light. But in my experience with bourbon, I have liked the hotter stuff, the higher proof, hotter stuff. But as far as cigar goes, I still prefer the lighter stuff. It's about as heavy as I go as Corojo, and stuff like that. So I like some good Maduros every once in a while and some good heavier stuff, Cameroons, but I kind of really got to be in the mood.
Yeah.
But my typical smoke, even though I've been smoking forever, I still enjoy a flavor that, in my mind, is embodied by our house blend, is that it's a nice medium-bodied cigar with a great flavor.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my experience with cigars, the flavor is important, but the build, the draw, and the burn are equally, if not more, important.
What do you mean by the build?
The build, like you start smoking halfway through a cigar and it's so tight that you can't even draw on it, or it runs down one side, or it pops and runs down a stem of the leaf or
Construction
something. Construction quality,
I gotcha.
like an actually well-made, consistent cigar. Because if the times that you get to sit down and have a cigar are becoming so far and few between because our lives are just so busy these days, and our opportunities are so much less than they used to be. So when I'm going to sit down and commit $15 to a good cigar in an hour and a half, I'm gonna get really mad if it starts falling apart after 10 minutes.
Right.
I'm gonna get really mad. Even if it tastes really good, if it's gonna fall apart, I'm gonna be really upset. So in our picks in the humidor, and why we finally chose our specific line, was that the guy that we used to build our line, which is Jesus Fuego, which is this on this ashtray here, is that of all the cigars I smoked made by him, all his different flavors and blends, all tasted great and everything, but the thing was they all had an amazing, consistent build, draw, and burn.
Okay.
So I was not getting one that really, ever, that would fail me. And so that was more important to me than flavor alone.
Absolutely.
My favorite thing, sorry.
No, go ahead.
My favorite thing about smoking cigars, like, kind of the progression of it. Like, when you start it, you smoke it, it's like a little lighter, and then as you kind of draw towards the end of it,
right,
the end is my favorite. Like, you get that like real fiery, like all really, the flavor like punch you in the face. That's like,
everyone has a different level to which they are willing to bring their cigar down. So like the minimum you'll normally see is you break a cigar into thirds when we talk about tasting. First third, middle, end third. Some guys let it die as soon as it hits into that last third.
Okay.
A lot of guys will what we call nub a cigar, which is where your fingers are burning because the flame is getting down to the nub. Yeah. And that flavor does change drastically, partly because of how it's rolled and how it's constructed. A lot of it is because when you're smoking that cigar, you are pushing the oils of it is coming more and more of it toward here. And it is, so a lot, and that's why it will eventually turn bitter, is because you're getting some of the bitter oils and the charred oils in the end. Some guys love that flavor. Same thing with like a barrel-proof bourbon. What a lot of people would consider maybe not their favorite flavor is what some of us, myself included, hunt for. Flavor.
Some guys
so strong.
Love that flavor to the point that they burn it down to where it's burning their fingers. Then when they can't smoke it anymore, they put it in their pipe
Yeah.
and finish it off in their actual pipe, which is, I've never tried it. Have you ever tried it?
I have done it.
Have you? I mean, it seems. I mean, but the thing is, if you got a good cigar, and a cigar from the start to finish is 100% tobacco. So I mean, there's nothing in there that's going to stop you from smoking the cap.
You get a well-aged, Lajero style or heavy cigar, or just a great cigar, Opus X or something like that, or a Liga Privada.
So in comparison, it'd be like you're at the end of your one of your favorite bottles of bourbon, and you're going to sit there just a little bit longer for that extra little drop to fall down into your glass. Even though it's not going to amount to anything, it's still worth it for you to get that little bit more out of it.
I just have one more. I know you got a list of questions.
It's all right. Keep going.
We're not in a hurry.
Which is
So,
day off.
I typically don't buy a lot of cigars and store them myself. I'm typically like, it's an event. I'm going to smoke them that day or in 2 days. So as a newbie, what is the best way to, store these and keep that, because humidity and levels matter, I guess, because you don't want too dry.
My best advice is don't.
Okay.
Literally, it is such a pain to keep cigars in your house.
Yeah.
And I've tried. I mean, there are some great two-way products out there and things like that. And in some instances, you have to do it. But you're never going to recreate that flavor of an actual mist, of an actual vaporizer that is in a walk-in humidor. Where you're going to get in there and it's going to be in a good walk-in humidor. Let's go there. Because there's a whole lot that goes into building a walk-in humidor down to the studs. So a lot of people try to keep them, and they'll bring it. And it's, I don't say that I egg them on, but sometimes I do. If they bring in a cigar and I say, I'm like, can I help you pick one out in the humidor? And they say, well, I brought one. And then I'll walk by them 5 minutes later and it's falling apart. And I'll just smugly be like, well, guess you should have bought one, And because I know if it comes out of my humidor, I'm making sure it's right. And so, and I'll stand by it. If you do get one that is an outlier, not good, then we'll replace it. But the flavor that you get from pulling it fresh out of a humidor is almost unmatched. Now, I understand in certain circumstances, if you're going up to, Northwest Ontario to go fishing, there's probably not a walk-in humidor next to your camp. So you have to take, and within 2 or 3 days, you can really pretty much maintain that idea. But so many people put so much time and effort into home storage. Now, unless they're on the spectrum, like maybe in a big beautiful house like this, a walk-in humidor would make sense on your own, and that you can do, and you don't have, it wouldn't be crazy expensive, but you would have to be a true aficionado or just to show off,
right? Absolutely,
to want to do that.
So there was 2 things that you kind of brought up, and first one I kind of want to hit on, and you talked about Maduro, you talked about started with the C, is it? Cameron. It's like kind of talk about, like, because this is still all new to me. Like, describe what each of those are. Like, if you were to classify them, and then if there's flavor characteristics or if there's just color characteristics. Like, what does all that mean?
Back to me.
Well, I'll just say quick about Maduro. Like, Maduro is not necessarily. Maduro doesn't stand for a region or a seed. Count me if I'm wrong here, but
No.
but it's more of a. So what they do with Maduros, they'll take a wrapper and they'll ferment it longer, and that's what kind of turns it into a Maduro. One quick note about Maduros is that a lot of people, it'll frustrate them if they don't do them a lot, because Maduros are much harder to keep lit, because through that fermentation process you have a lot more oils in them. And so if you kind of neglect it, it'll keep going out on you, and it'll really bug a lot of people. So if you have a Maduro and it keeps going out on you, it's probably not the cigar's fault.
Right.
And so when we're talking about classifications, he's right. Maduro, where a lot of it we go by country or area or region, sort of where it's grown. Maduro is a shade color. We break colors down into the real simple older terms are a double claro, nowadays known as a candela. Which is a very, very light color cigar, almost green in color.
Oh yeah.
Then we have
very little ferment.
Then you have a claro, which is more commonly known as a Connecticut shade. Today we call everything that's really light a Connecticut shade, even though it's, again, Connecticut is where the leaf was grown, and so you can have a light colored Honduran or Nicaraguan shade and very commonly people just call it a Connecticut shade because that's the color we're used to. Then you get into Colorado, which is your natural shades, what you think of a classic cigar, medium brown. And then you get into Maduro. So Maduro is a color classification which describes the fermentation process. Each one of those is either aged somewhere longer, whether it's aged on the stalk longer, whether it's aged in the barn. In the case of Maduros, it is steamed and aged and actually fermented. When you get into barrel aged cigars, you're talking about a real fermentation process.
That's why they're typically more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because they're handled. And as you get darker, your flavors change by and large with the shade of color. So in a Connecticut shade or Connecticut broadleaf, you expect a light body, which is a light mouthfeel, not a real heavy smoke. You expect a creaminess to it. That's why it goes really well. That's why it's a good starter cigar. It doesn't leave that really lingering aftertaste on your tongue.
Or a forever cigar if that's your preference.
A forever cigar if you don't ever want to get into dark cigars. And it pairs really well with a lot of stuff, but it can be overpowered by heavy stuff. When you get into Colorados, you're going to start getting heavier into leather flavors, cedar flavors, hardwoods. You're getting...
Did you bring any Cedro?
I didn't bring a Cedro. You get into some cedar flavors. I didn't bring a lot of Romeo, sorry. But you're getting into a medium body, a little heavier smoke, a little higher nicotine content. And then when you get into Maduros, the Maduros are the big boys of flavor, but they are also the harshest on the palate as far as, again, it'd be like jumping straight into a George T. Stagg for somebody.
But some really good Maduros, like really good. Only a couple, well-aged, well-maintained, don't get harsh.
Well, that's like
they just get
there's
deep.
some rare barrel
Right.
proofs. They kind of
Right.
like
They
it
just
doesn't
get-
taste barrel proof.
It's a real deep, almost
when it's done right,
mocha flavor that comes out of it that is just
you get what
Magical.
You go
Magical.
almost full circle into what we call an oscuro, which you don't see a lot anymore. Very
Right.
rare cigar, but you get almost back to that creaminess. But in Maduros, you're going to be picking up dark chocolate flavors, really heavy leather flavors, some dark fruit flavors, like what you'd call baking spice in bourbon or in whiskeys.
Any
and
marzipan cigars? No,
you
I'm
beat me
kidding.
to it. I was trying my best to work that in today. Sweetness is one we don't get a lot on cigars. There are very few tobaccos
so
that bring a
basically
sweetness
you're saying
to it.
that in a Maduro you could find a plethora of flavors.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, you're getting the widest assortment of flavors. That is one problem associated when people, the most common thing I get when you walk in, they walk in the humidor. I want a light cigar. You think you want a light cigar.
It's like saying I want a smooth bourbon.
Yes. Damn it. Yes. That's exactly what it's like.
What's your language?
No, that's perfectly
podcast.
fine. Yeah.
That's exactly what it's like. Because when you say I want a light cigar, what you're really saying is I want a cigar without a lot of flavor.
I want a cigarette.
Warm air. But honestly, some people do want warm air.
And right,
that's-
and if you're starting
'cause-
off-
right, they're just a part of a bachelor party or a group or whatever, and they don't want to be tasting it for the next 3 days, and they don't.
Or we're going golfing, it's 90
They're not
degrees.
committing. Yeah, they're not committing to anything. They're just because okay, I'll jump into this. One of the biggest things about cigars, and also with bourbon, but huge with cigars, is not actually the cigar itself. It is the camaraderie, the friendship, what you do while you're having a cigar.
Right.
Because with a cigar, it's not golfing, it's not watching a movie. It's just sitting with people that you like, spending an hour and a half with while the other person's talking, having a draw of your cigar. So you're actually engaging so much with somebody else in this world where nobody engages with anybody through looking at their phones or whatever. The Facebook and the Instagram
Careful
and all
now.
that, and which have their place, but you everybody can agree that you need to sit back and take some time learning about your fellow man, and cigars are a great medium for that because you take the time to do it, and it's kind of something to bond over, and a lot of people think about their grandfathers when they smell it and all that stuff, and it kind of just brings back really good memories and things like that. So it's more of a lifestyle and an experience.
Yeah, I mean that kind of like rolled into like the next thing I was going to ask is like because a lot of the times people always said like cigars and scotch, and now it's kind of moving to cigars and bourbon. Like, why do you think this pairing kind of happens? You talked a little bit about the camaraderie, and we've talked about people don't want to open their special bottles, but like they're supposed to be special. To open them with your friends, stuff like that.
To the
right?
point of
And-
that, the reason we chose the location that we did for Jake's is not only because originally I was a chef originally, so I was going to buy an old restaurant in Lexington and turn the kind of dining area into a cigar lounge and use the kitchen for my corporate catering. I really like doing catering.
Okay.
Weird thing about me, I make a lot of decisions based off fortune cookies. So
I like it.
I got a fortune cookie that said, if you chase 2 rabbits, both will get away. So I was like, well, I got to choose either cigars or catering. Mm-hmm. And at that time, it was an interesting story of how I ended up owning a cigar distribution company, but I owned a cigar distribution company. And so I had a lot more money invested in that. So I decided I'll just go on the cigar side and figure that out. So I was looking at different spots in Lexington to actually put the cigar bar. But in Lexington, the laws are that you cannot drink and smoke in the same place unless 80% or more of your sales are tobacco, which is almost impossible with alcohol. Mm-hmm. So it was going to be a non-drinking lounge. And then my lovely wife, Autumn, looked at me one day and said, well, you only really like to have a nice cigar when you're having some drinks, you know? So why do you think that would be a good idea? She's very blunt. So she said, why do you think that would be a good idea if you wouldn't even want to? I'm like, well, that's a dang fine point. And so there was this development called Brandon Crossing, and it's just south of Fayette County. And technically, it's in Nicholasville. They basically annexed Brandon Crossing to Nicholasville, even though it's closer to Lexington than Nicholasville, so that they could allow drinking. Because at the time, it's very all confusing, but at the time, Jessamine County was dry, so you couldn't drink in the county, but the city itself, Nicholasville, was wet. So they annexed Brandon Crossing to be part of the city so that a Red Robin can go in there and things like that where you can have this alcohol. So it kind of just worked to be the perfect storm of we're close enough to Lexington that we can draw from that crowd, but the laws will allow us to have a drinking and smoking cigar establishment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I guess, and Jeremy, I'll kind of point this one to you. Just like, what do you think's the fascination with, bourbon and cigars and how they kind of draw people together or how they draw flavors together? Like, what's your kind of take on that?
Quick thing, sidebar, because this is where we're at.
We like sidebars.
Sorry, I will answer this. Great question. But where you're at in your cigars, when your ash is starting to get a little long, if possible, let it fall off naturally.
Okay.
Your cigar ash acts as an insulator for that ember. And so the longer the ash, the cooler the smoke, the better flavor it's going to have.
Interesting.
So
I'm always quick to ash.
Oh, no, don't be quick to ash.
That's a good sidebar.
And even you want a nice ash.
Yeah.
Okay.
And even to the point of it gets so cool when it finally falls off that it'll fall in your clothes and you just kind of brush it off.
And you'll instantaneously notice a flavor difference when that ash falls off.
Of course, Jeremy gets upset with me when I'm at the bar, and I'll be standing there talking to my drink, and my ash will finally fall off, and so I'll just move the ashtray on top of the ash, so I don't have to see it. So he'll walk around at the end of the night and find piles of ashes underneath my ashtray.
Yeah.
So I wanted to tell you that about the ash. Also, the band.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big
huge
debate.
controversy.
Yeah, there's a lot
huge.
We used to have a lot of etiquette and aristocracy in cigar smoking, which is something that thankfully has went away to an extent today where it's more of a common thing that everybody's doing. But it was whether you keep the band on or not. If for practicality reasons, I got impatient and took the band off, and this is the reason you often don't want to. These are held on together by just a little glue. And if you take them off, you have a chance of if the glue overran the side of the paper, it will rip the
That's why you wait until it gets almost right down to the paper.
That's what I do.
And
I'll wait till the end, then I rip it off.
The heat actually loosens up that glue and helps it come off.
Yeah, so the lesson being be a little more patient than I was. The pairing of bourbon
Well,
with
it's okay.
cigars.
You can just slide another one. You did,
Right,
I paid for them. So,
We only brought like 60, so we're good.
Absolutely. The pairing, there's the personal opinion and the history of it. The history of it was, we discovered tobacco when they land in the Indies or the Caribbean, and they're making the history there as it moves forward is we're making sort of a couple things well. We're making rum and we're making cigars. And so when you come and visit, that's what you're taking back to England, is rum and cigars. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of where the natural pairing comes from. Why it's lasted and moved on, the flavors complement each other extremely well. We use a lot of the same when we're talking about the flavor wheel or whenever we get that far.
You're talking about leather, tobacco.
Right, you're talking about very similar flavors.
Yeah.
It works really well. To Jake's point, I think he's right. I think it's at the end of the day, we say, you drink the bourbon you like. You smoke the best cigar is the one you like. When you're with friends, they seem to go well together. The bourbon relaxes you. It is the as my favorite customer Dave Matthews said, it is the lubricant of good conversation. And the cigar is what brings you down to slow down good conversation, to enjoy it. And I think that's, from just a personal point of view, I think that's why they go together well.
Yeah, to your all's point, both points, like bourbon and even now the cigar, like, is my, like, only time to have, like, zen. Like, where I'm, like, totally into, like, the flavors. Like, I'm not distracted by what's going on in life. I can kind of just sit there, focus, and I'm like, okay, you're kind of, it's like the only time I'm, like, fully present.
Which
in
is
this crazy
where at
life.
Jake's, it's very, I mean, I know he's heard it a gazillion times, and I have too, is that people come in, well, I was just going to come in and have one cigar or one drink. And
3 hours later.
It's like, it's like 9 hours later. It's like, where did my day go? But, I mean, I've had a blast, because you get in that zone where you kind of escape the problems of the world. There's a whole lot less escapes these days of the problems of the world, and you kind of get in there, and it's like, I'm going to have something I like with people I like. Why would I ever want to leave? And so it just goes so well together.
Right.
I heard there was a gentleman, George Brightman. He's one of the original sort of editors-in-chief of Cigar Aficionado. I got to meet him, had the pleasure a couple weeks ago, and someone asked him a similar question. He goes, at the end of the day, why do we love cigars? And he said, because it's the modern-day campfire. He goes, it's where guys and girls, people gather. He goes, we don't have the time anymore to take 3-day vacations every month or 3 weekend vacations. He goes, but we have 20 minutes once a week to sit down with a couple friends and have a cigar. He goes, it's the same thing we used to. He goes, everybody used to have a campfire every night during the summer, and friends would come over and neighbors, and you would just have a get-together. He goes, we don't have that time anymore, so we have the cigar.
Well, on it, why don't you explain the box press you got in your hand?
My favorite cigar, the box press cigar. So when we were talking about sizes and all the names of, like I said, Corona and Churchill and all that, which tells you a little bit about the length and the size, there are some that describe the shape more. So a torpedo describes, as Jake said, a cigar that comes to a point. A figurado is a great word we get to use for any odd-shaped cigar. Anything that
both
ends
ends come to a point.
All the other rules don't fit. A box press is my favorite style of cigar, and it's a little square, and sometimes it's very rectangular in shape, and sometimes it's just a little. These are actually, after they are rolled, put into a mold that creates a box press. It does a few things that I love. It creates a consistency and burn that I don't find in a lot of cigars. It's also great if you're a bartender like I am. When you're trying to just sit it down, it doesn't roll anywhere. It's right the hell where it's supposed to be. And so that's...
But the reason I don't like a box press...
Of course you don't.
Is
because Jeremy does. That's
No, you're not always wrong. But, so... I'm very odd in regard. I feel like it's limiting my options. I can only hold it 4 ways.
Right.
With a round cigar... You can just turn it a little bit, but with a square, you got to either do it this way, this way, this way, this way. So if I have a burn that this one's just, and I like to keep very consistent burn all the way through, so I'll turn it just a little bit, just to get that.
And what was
I feel like it's
the burn. If it's burning if it's burning faster on one side, you hold that side down. Is that correct? Or
okay. So this is where him and I
we have different opinions on this.
If I am smoking it actively, I will hold it down. But if I set it down, I will hold it up.
Okay.
Gotcha.
We're in agreement there.
Okay.
We just didn't specify before whether you're smoking
down,
or resting.
down, that's when you're actively smoking it, then the weight of everything. But if it's just sitting there smoldering and it's not coming through the cigar, it's just the end, then you want that up so it'll kind of even that out.
Gotcha.
To sidebar again, too, because it's where we're at in the process of smoking cigars. If it dies on you, and cigars die all the time. Maduros die more often because they're moist, just a higher moisture content or more oil in them. You're good to relight them within 20 to 30 minutes.
Okay.
And here's what you do.
I learned this trick from you. Go ahead.
Right. And what you do is you knock off all the ash you can. Actually pretty aggressively without cracking it up against the table, knock it all off. Toast the end a little bit, just like you're lighting it for the first time. But this is the difference. What you do, you put your mouth up to it, and you blow. You blow the smoke through. Because when it went out, it traps stale smoke in your cigar. So that's where you're going to start, and it's going to get trapped in there unless you blow it all out a couple times. couple good blows to get it all out. Then you can hold your flame about an inch away from it and draw it back in. And then you're basically, you've cleared out all the bad, and you're ready to start back with the good.
Interesting. It's definitely interesting.
Like I said, we're at in the process of the smoke. After about 30 minutes, maybe an hour, they're just...
Sometimes if you don't remember to take a draw every once in a while.
Yeah,
like
once
that,
it's once that stale tobacco has really permeated the leaf, because the leaves are porous, obviously. So once that actually permeates, you can smoke it, but it's not going to be the same quality that you had in the beginning.
And Kenny, interesting. I just thought of this. Back to your... I get asked a lot why the cigar pairing has changed. It used to be cigar and rum a long time ago. It was in cigar and scotch for a while, and still is cigar and ports.
We got off a little topic, didn't we?
Or wines. Well, I just remember this part of it. And now it's cigar and bourbon. A lot of that is trending with whatever is popular for the palate of the area you're in at the time. If you're when I lived in Key West, it's still cigars and rum. It always has been, probably always will be. If you're in Europe, it's still cigars and port. It's still cigars and wine. In America, thankfully, it is becoming cigars and bourbon. But as long as you're
for a good reason.
If you're in Lexington, Kentucky, it's definitely
right. Absolutely.
As long as you're in the same flavor profiles as those, I think the spirit matches. But that's why it seems to change. So it doesn't go good
with like gin and tonics and
whatever you want. Yeah. Now, one thing that is good that we haven't talked about at all is a lot of people. Cigars are really good with a good coffee. Really good with a good coffee. We carry.
I see a lot of old men in Florida wake 6 in the morning.
You can get a Cuban coffee in Florida, and that's what when we did the Jake cigar. What I did is to.
I'm like, how are they doing this at 6 a.m.?
Right. It just goes so well together. They greeted me at the airport, smoking a cigar, drinking a Cuban coffee, and it was just the first time I ever tasted that pairing, and it was just like, wow. But you can't, it's hard to get good Cuban coffee up here.
Right.
But you can get a good dark roast.
If you ever want to indulge yourself, guys, I'm telling you.
I think you're talking to the right people.
Right. Next time you're on a family vacation, I did this last time we went out. Wake up before everybody else does. If you can find a decent place that has coffee, great. If not, make it. Go out on the porch, get a light Connecticut shade, a Monte Cristo white label or something like that. Have that, and a cup of coffee in silence.
And then you're going to take a dump.
It'll be it's the best way to start a day you'll ever have.
You're probably not far off. So, the one thing I want to also ask, when we start diving into like some of the pairings here real quick is, when you're smoking a cigar, do you think like some of your like taste buds, your receptors, like a lot of those things change versus if you're just drinking bourbon naturally itself without smoking or anything like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. As a matter of fact, Nat Sherman, who is still a popular cigar maker, but his father, Nat Sherman, created the cigar dinner. Believed it was so imperative to the dinner process, the tasting process, to light up your taste buds that you would use it as you would an aperitif. That it lights up and that it will. You want to try to complement your whiskey, and it will. It will accentuate it. It's hard to overpower, but you can do it. I mean, if you went with a foolproof bourbon, you went with a really mild cigar, the cigar would just win. If you went with a Maduro and you were drinking Basil Hayden, the cigar is just going to win.
Yeah.
It's a lot safer to play in the mid grounds. To play in the bottled and bond 100 proof range with a medium-bodied cigar, and those flavors will complement each other, and they do light it up. But if you're a person, I love spicy food. So to me, nothing is better than a Corojo-style cigar, which is a very spicy, oily cigar.
Like our Jake cigar.
I like the spicy.
Like a Jake cigar.
Yep.
And the Jake cigar...
That's what we're having next.
Yeah, very much will do that. Will light up another bourbon. And I like to pair it with a rye, which for most people is going to be too much. It'll blow your head off. But I love it because they will build on top of each other. The more you smoke the cigar, the spicier the cigar gets, and the spicier it will make that bourbon. And so, yeah, it will definitely open up.
People don't, and these days, he hit on something that is kind of an old school thing, and he's kind of an old school soul. And I agree with it wholeheartedly, is that people have gotten away from not only pairing cigars with liquids, but you can pair cigars with food, and you can get some of the most amazing results. You know, I mean, eating some chocolate with them, some nuts, or a slice of pizza. I mean, just what it does is it just you get that
sausage and onions combo.
Right. Well, they both.
Yeah.
Well, they
Yeah.
kind of. It's like smoke is like salt in that regard. It brings out the flavors that are already there.
You're getting that umami flavor eventually.
Right. It's just well balanced, and it's just pulling out the little things. So because the smoke is already kind of awoken your senses, and then you taste something else, be it a bourbon, which is my preference, but also foods with it is it's a gone thing because of laws and everything that you're not pairing them as much.
Right.
But it's something definitely to try on your back porch. Is just sit and get some of your favorite foods and try a great antipasta platter. You know, cheeses, grapes, your meats, your deli meats and all that stuff. Not like, a slice of turkey, or something. But like,
Like
some
charcuterie.
Yeah, some like,
good salami
real
or,
nice salamis and capicolas and stuff like that. You're really going to...
Country ham.
Right. You're really going to be great with it.
Interesting. So
Country these days-
Country ham and a cigar, you're going to need a
If
glass of
anybody's
water.
looking
too.
for an entrepreneurial spirit, if you open up a country ham restaurant and want a cigar selection and a bourbon selection, I will do my best to volunteer my services to make that happen. I'm just saying.
You're leaving Jake.
He's not leaving.
I'm indentured to Jake.
That's not going to happen.
So there was something, Jeremy, that you mentioned earlier. Talked about different flavors that are in the first third and the second third. I mean, is there a sweet spot in your opinion, or do you think it varies between the person? This episode of Bourbon Pursuit is made possible through listeners like you, supported through Patreon, and with partnerships brought to you by the following. If you're like me, finding the perfect button-down shirt that fits right, isn't baggy, and doesn't look cheap, it's a real challenge. And I don't want the same clothes every other guy's wearing. I want to look good and stand apart without standing out. And I still need to look professional and polished for work. When I have an important meeting or just want to look my best, wearing a great fitting, high quality shirt makes me feel more confident. And that's why I'm glad I found out about Leadberry.com. Leadberry offers premium fabric on all their shirts, sport coats, pants, sweaters, and ties. Their customer service is more like a consultation with premium assistance where you get to talk to a real person right away. They have over 1,000 5-star reviews, but really, I could go on and on. Take it from me. I've ordered from Leadberry, and they are really some of the best shirts that I own in my closet. Visit leadberry.com, LEDBURY.com/bourbon today and use coupon code BOURBON at checkout to get 20% off your first order. Boring and overpriced. That's what you can expect these days from 99% of watch brands out there. That's why I've turned to Vincero. And who knew? It turns out a nice watch doesn't have to cost you a fortune. Watches that look and feel this way typically retail for over $500 or more, while Vincero watches start at just a little over $100. I've been wearing the white and rose gold automatic for a few weeks now, and I can't get enough of it. The sophisticated modern style with a genuine leather crocodile band that has an actual smooth movement is amazing for the price. I can't tell you how many compliments I've received in just the first few weeks alone. On top of all that, you can shop safely knowing Vincero has over 5,000 5-star reviews, offers free first-class shipping, and has a 2-year warranty. So don't just get a watch, get the watch. Visit getthewatch.net today to see Vincero's stunning collection. And if you use promo code BOURBON, you'll receive 15% off your very own Vincero watch. They also have a great collection of women's watches if you haven't scooped up a nice gift for your lady yet. And if you're a last-minute shopper, don't worry. Expedited shipping is available. Visit getthewatch.net and use promo code BOURBON for 15% off your Vincero watch. So, there was something, Jeremy, that you mentioned earlier, talked about different flavors that are in the first third and the second third. I mean, is there a sweet spot in your opinion, or do you think it varies between the person?
Oh, yeah, I think it varies much. Very much.
There is a sweet spot, and it's between the person.
Yeah.
It's all subjective.
So I guess what's your sweet spot?
For me, I'm with Ryan on this.
We're still talking about cigars.
Thank you. For me, it's the last third. I like big, heavy, oily
I'm getting close
cigars.
to there, and I'm getting it. I'm starting to like it.
And yeah, I mean, when it gets back, and you do have to be a little more careful. I mean, it gets a little more adventurous when you're playing with those flavors. But for me, it's the last third. I think for most people, though, it's the middle.
Right. For me, it's the middle.
Yeah. It's the second third.
It's the we're warming up, and now we're here, and then it's like, okay,
Then when you get to the last third, you're like, oh shit, it's almost over.
Right, but also it depends on the cigar. Like, I'll smoke a cigar that I'll get down to the last third, and I'll be like, you know what, this is, the profile's changed a little bit too much for me. But some cigars, I'll be down to when I'm burning my fingers, and it didn't change very much. It really depends on some of the cigars themselves too.
Per your recommendation, I'm about a 2-inch ash here, or inch and a half.
Don't knock it.
I'm trying to keep it.
Don't knock it. I've seen 4 or 5 inch ashes.
We've had inevitably on a Good Friday night there are competitions at the bar of who can have the longest ash.
What's the longest you've seen?
Nub ran a contest one time. There's a company called Nub.
Yeah, but
Cigars.
nubs are only 4 inches long, so I mean.
Well, they did it with any cigar. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
And they ran a contest. Show us your best ash. Great play on words. And it was probably. It was probably 4.5 inches of just ash. By the way, it also tells something about the construction and quality of a cigar.
Absolutely.
It's not necessarily to have
and how windy it is.
And how windy it is. You don't have to have a 3, 4, 5 inch ash, but a quality made cigar should hold at least 1.5 inches or so ash given. If it's ashing before that, assuming that it's not blowing wind outside, then it's usually a construction issue.
Good deal. So I'm gonna throw some bourbons at you, and I'm gonna just kind of ask, what would be your ideal pairing with something like this? And this is one we always talk about on the show. Ryan just poured it for himself, and it's the
you're gonna speak the unspeakable name?
Yeah. So it's the Henry McKenna Bottled and Bond 10-year, 100 proof, pretty solid, reliable bourbon. $30, $25 if it's on sale. Kroger or wherever you can find it, right? So, if somebody comes and says, I want a Henry McKenna, and then what kind of cigar should I pair with something like that?
So, Bottled and Bond bourbons are sort of my favorite playground as far as pairing with cigars. They are in my opinion, the best proof and usually the best flavor profile, because we know they're at least 4 years old and all that. We're getting into, and it's a very versatile. So you can go as far. The extremes I would go with is a light medium shade. So I'll give you an example. I wouldn't go any lighter than a Romeo and Juliet Red Label 1875, which is sort of their classic. I wouldn't, and you can start to tiptoe into Maduros. I wouldn't go crazy, but you can get into Ahoy de Monterey Maduro, or a Christoph Natural, or Christoph Maduro. You can start to get into that, but they really play best in those middle brown shades, Habano seeds, Cameroons, and I guess some of those off the top of my head. That Christoph Habano is going to go great with it. What else we got in the humidor that would work well? The Jake cigar was designed for that. Mm-hmm. The Jake cigar was designed to go well with bourbons that we love. Well, bourbons that we love, which happens to be those range of 100 proof bourbons.
So I'll throw another one at you, right? So, I've been sitting here. I've had the same cigar, but I have 3 different bourbons so far. I haven't actually tried it with the Henry McKenna yet. So I've had it with the Four Roses, which before we actually started, you said Four Roses almost pairs with anything.
Yeah,
no one seems to know why.
It was perfect with the Four Roses.
Four Roses may be the most, especially single barrel, maybe the most versatile cigar pairing. It's always a safe bet. Sometimes it'll surprise you and blow you away, but it's never bad.
Yeah.
I credit that to the high rye blend. I think high rye bourbons are the sweet spot for most cigars. Wheated bourbons work better with lighter Connecticut shades, and full-on ryes really compete well with Maduros. But for your mid shades, which is the majority of your cigars, a high rye blend of Four Roses seems to always work as a safe bet.
It does seem like that.
And then we drink the Eagle Rare with my cigar. The cigar actually overpowered the Eagle Rare, where I couldn't.
And proof played a large part in that too.
It was probably the proof too, but it kind of made the Eagle Rare there was no flavors in the bourbon versus.
It's amazing, because I was about to say the same exact thing, because that second pour I had, same cigar, had Eagle Rare, and it just didn't do anything for me, right? But the Henry McKenna I would actually put on top of the Eagle Rare. However, I still think the Four Roses is the best of the 3 so far that I've had with this particular cigar.
Especially with that cafe you had.
Yeah, absolutely.
It competes well. There's when we try to pair cigars, there's the balancing act of you can either, and most of the time you want to complement the flavors of your bourbon, or you can accentuate. Accentuating becomes little bit more of a dangerous man's game because you can go too far in one direction or the other and ruin the experience. Where complementing's easy. If it's a high rye blend, you're wanting something that has a little bit of spice to it, enough spurs to hang with it. If it's a wheat, you want something a little sweeter that will complement that sweetness. When you get dangerous is when you get into the big flavors of both. Like for me, pairing a Weller Antique is pretty easy. It's going to hang with a light cigar. It's also I get to move into some of those natural shade, medium body, the Partagas style cigars. But if somebody comes in and goes, I want a Elijah Craig barrel proof, and I like big spicy Maduros, we now have to find a very specific combination for you because there's not a whole lot, you don't have a lot of room for error. So that's my biggest suggestion when you start pairing cigars and bourbon. Start safe. Start with something 90 to 100 proof. Start with a lighter or medium-bodied cigar, and then get adventurous. Because when you get adventurous, it can work out great.
Or they can clash.
Right. Jake can attest. Jake doesn't like mostly big cigars and big bourbons, but a George Stagg bourbon, barrel proof with the right cigar,
is amazing.
Right. So I guess let's talk a little bit more about when we move up a little bit higher in proof, right? So what we're looking at, let's say, like I got a bottle out here of Stag Junior, right? So if you're looking at a Stag Junior and you've got something that's creeping up to 120, 130 proof, like what kind of cigar are you really looking at to recommend to a customer if they're wanting something to that? And, you had mentioned already Elijah Craig barrel proof with the Maduro, but somebody like me, like I know my bourbons, but I don't know my cigars. Like what's that good pairing right there?
And we don't want to throw you into a Maduro off the bat for most people, unless you just tell me I love black coffee and dark chocolate. We're not throwing you into
even
that.
with that though, you still have to take into account how much of a cigar smoker they are, because they might love big, bold bourbons, and so they think they like big, bold cigars, but they smoke one a month. You don't want to get them to the situation where they're
standing up and falling down.
Right, that they've been made uncomfortable and they've been turned off by cigars because they know what their body reacts to the big, bold bourbons. But wait, this cigar just
when you throw that in there,
put me on my butt, and so I don't want to do the cigar anymore. So you got to really take that into account as someone because that's one thing we do at the store that people really appreciate is that we will take into account everybody's situation and preferences to recommend a cigar that's going to kind of enhance their experience.
And I've made that mistake before. Like I've had like a big bold Willet, barrel proof.
Right.
And then had a big bold Monte Cristo.
Right.
And I felt like I just ripped the bong 10 times.
And you got to...
And I was like, I'm sick. Like, I'm not feeling good.
I'm not sure what that means, but that's where you need somebody on your side. That's where, yes.
I shouldn't have... Yeah, somebody to say, don't even go down. Don't even go down that road.
You need someone like us that wants your experience to be good so that you come back.
Yeah, and then exactly after that, I was like, man, cigars, I just don't like them.
Right, because it's like the next morning, you're like, that's the cigar, they got me.
I'm still chewing on that.
Right, and all that. Right. And it's like, we do enjoy profit and people coming back. So we're not going to do that to you because we don't want to do that to ourselves, or you, but we don't want to do it to ourselves. So we don't want to turn anybody off of cigars.
Absolutely not.
And Ryan, what's your point right now? So you just poured yourself Henry McKenna with your what do you have?
It's a Christoph Habano.
So, I'm not
kind of
sure. Like what do you think is your ideal right now? Do you like the Henry McKenna or do you like the Four Roses with it so far?
I still think the Four Roses still was the best.
Still inching out ahead of you?
Yeah. And I don't know. That was a private barrel selection, so I'm not sure which.
It's just an OESK.
An OESK,
the best
which is the best.
It's just the best.
But it seemed like the flavors of the Four Roses stood out more, and like they both complement each other better than this Henry McKenna is better than the Eagle Rare, but the Four Roses still was my favorite so far.
And to answer the question on high proof bourbons. Like I said, the fun place is in Maduros, but it's a little dangerous. When you come to higher proof bourbons, the oil content of a cigar really helps out with that. So I can put you in a lighter cigar with a higher proof bourbon if it has a great oil content. So, for example, that that Habano or a good Criollo, which is again a style, typically have higher oil contents. And it's really easy to tell an oily cigar. It will have a sheen to it when you look at it. I've got a Camacho barrel-aged bourbon one right there, and it just shines. It has a gloss to it that is the oil of it. That oil and that cigar that coats your mouth, one, helps protect from sort of the high proof of the cigar. This is back to why it pairs so well. Sort of those... I don't want to offend Jimmy, so I got to figure out a different word.
If you offend Jimmy, that might be the end of you and Jake's.
Jimmy didn't like the ethanol flavor. The high proof flavor of bourbon, just the alcohol flavor, is softened when that oil coats your mouth from the smoke. That's why the fun really gets into high proof bourbons, big oily cigars, which typically are Maduros, but there are oily cigars that are not, because your palate is protected by those oils, and so you can really get into the flavor without a lot of that harshness. You still get the Kentucky hug at the end of it, but you don't get a lot of that rawness on the front end.
Right.
So we can so if you're drinking a Stag Junior and it's your first time, we can still get you into a cigar without taking you into big bold cigars. A little more challenging, but still doable.
So let's go the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Because I know we had mentioned it earlier, but like Basil Hayden and something 80
Gosh, I
proof,
love Basil Hayden.
something
That's
really
like
easy.
the gateway.
Your wheelhouse.
It's the gateway bourbon. So
So
a lot of
love it.
newbie bourbon drinkers, they drink Basil Hayden. They're like, that's
Don't call Jake a newbie to this, right?
No, absolutely not. But it's a good day. A good day bourbon. What I mean, you're sitting, you're really enjoying yourself. You're not looking for anything over the top. It's so consistent too. I mean, I just love.
So talk about like what kind of cigars would you pair with something that's easy? I mean, right now we're sitting outside and it's a solid 90 degrees, maybe 85. But like if it's a hot day, it's really easy to drink a low proof bourbon like that. So what kind of cigar would you pair with something like
Something that doesn't overpower it.
Yeah.
You don't want to just sit there like can't taste what you're drinking. Even as mellow as Basil Hayden is, if you really kind of think about it and focus on it, it has a good flavor profile. So you don't want anything to take away from that.
So what kind of? Give an example.
You go with a Connecticut. I mean, go with a lighter smoke cigar. You would.
Connecticut's will work well, and especially Connecticut's that are actually grown in other places start to work really well with your Basils and Blantons, your 90, 85 proof range. Because a Connecticut grown in America actually has a fair amount of strength to it.
Yeah.
A light color, but a fair nicotine kick. Not huge, but noticeable. But when they grow it in different climates, it mellows it out quite a bit. So when you have
And that goes
in
back
Jamaica,
to that growing period.
a Macanudo grown there, it mellows out a lot. So you're going to want to stick with that Connecticut shade, what I called a Claro earlier, but much more commonly known as a Connecticut shade. A light body is going to be okay without going over the top. You can go as far as...
I wouldn't. The Jakes. I'd go Corojo.
Nicaraguan. That's what I'm
Nicaraguan
saying.
Corojo would be about as far as I would want to go with the Basil Hayden.
Yeah.
Where that strength is not overpowering, but sometimes that pepper can complement.
Nicaraguan cigars, one of the reasons they're so popular right now is because almost anything can grow there. They also pick up, I talked earlier about how we rarely get sweetness naturally in cigars until we get into those big, well-fermented style cigars. A lot of Nicaraguan cigars, by terroir, by the way it's planted, is picking up a little bit of sweetness, like a Connecticut shade grown in Nicaragua would go great with it.
Absolutely.
I'm kind of noticing as I get towards that last third of the cigar that the Henry McKenna is now pairing much better with it.
Right.
Is that because of the spiciness of the last third?
They're standing up with each other
Okay.
And that is the
because the
beauty
McKenna
of-
was kind of overpowering the cigar.
in the middle. Right.
In the middle, but now at the end it's a match made in heaven.
And those become really fun when especially if you're smoking a good length cigar, Churchill or better, a 6-inch, 5.5-inch or better cigar. When you have solid segments of thirds that you can walk a bourbon through that. Those are a lot of fun. We do those at the bar, not as much as we'd like, but as often as I can to do a flight of bourbons with one cigar. And hopefully having smoked enough of those to know how it's going to change, to put you with a flight of bourbons that will change
At the
with
right
it.
time, yeah.
Oh hell, I'm
Comes a
going
lot
through
of
a
fun.
flight of bourbon with my little guy, right?
Well, I'm about to switch your little guy out. I have to jump over to the Jakes.
That's fine. We can try that. If you want to, you can go ahead and start that, and I'll kind of
Okay.
throw another question. While we're doing this.
Please.
So I'm looking at the idea. What I want to do is I want to bring some bourbons to the table and kind of ask generic questions, because these are some bourbons that are fairly kind of easy to get in the market and stuff like that. So rye whiskey is starting to grow in popularity a lot, right? I mean, you've got a lot of people that are trying, different proofs, different levels. You've got some that are coming from different distilleries.
Give me that one. Give him one with a V cut so he can experience that.
And so you've got things like Sazerac rye that I have out here, and that's a solid $30-$40 bottle if you can find it. And I've also got Russell's Reserve rye, which is 104 proof, so a little bit more. But you're looking at two different distilleries. When I taste these, I taste the rye a lot more in Russell's than I do inside of Sazerac. So if you are, we'll take two of these as good examples. So like when somebody comes, like give some examples of what kind of cigars that you would pair with a particular type of rye whiskey.
Funny you say that. This cigar, I have smoked more of than any other cigar. Just because I'm trying to make sure that throughout the batches we're staying consistent.
This is the Jake cigar too.
This is the Jake cigar.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I was just about to ask you to hand me the Russell's rye. Because
easy enough
with this cigar is phenomenal, absolutely. And the Russell's rye is not extremely hard to get or anything.
Unless you want a barrel pick.
Unless you want a barrel pick, which we'll do, Jeremy.
One of these days.
You keep talking me into it. But
we'll go with you.
this Russell's with this cigar, with a Nicaraguan Corojo, which is what this one is. But this one is special because it has a Brazilian Habano wrapper. So it's got that medium body fill, but it's got that kind of spicy wrapper, which is going to give it a little bit more to stand up to the rye. So that's why I would pair these two together. Now the Sazerac, also amazing with the medium bodied cigars with a little bit of spice. And to be honest, I've only gotten into ryes within the last year
since I pushed John's on.
Since he's very pushy, and but he's bigger than me, so that's all right, I guess. But so he will push me into that, and I was a little skeptical in the beginning, because I'm all about Kentucky, Lexington, bourbon.
Right.
That's it, and so he started showing me these ryes, and I was very skeptical. Then I started to taste them. Then I started to taste them with cigars, and I'm like, we might explore this let's not jump head first, but let's keep this open, and then one that really got me into it was the Sazerac. And even one of the first ones that really got me into it was the Knob Creek rye. I think that's a really good rye. Mm-hmm. And
then you had the Booker's rye, and life changed.
Then I had the Booker's rye. But we just start look, that's fine. That's a whole. And the Van Winkle rye.
Oh yeah,
man, those are just something else. But I don't know. I see how much those cost me, so I drink things like the Russell's rye, the Sazerac, which are amazing. And here in a minute, once you light up that Jake's and try a little bit of one of these ryes, you're going to
professional on hand to do
no, it's great.
Like
you're going to see you're going to not have to wait.
Cool. So
to see the how well they pair together.
So let's think about the other 49 states within the U.S. that aren't going to make the destination trip to Jake's, but give some ideas. What are some of those other kind of cigars that pair well with ryes that they could go to their own local cigar shop that aren't necessarily around Lexington?
Well, we will
or
give you
Louisville,
those options, but we'll also tell you that we can ship in the 49 contiguous.
Oh, okay. So there we go.
So if you call us, we will send. There is no rules against us shipping you one to as many Jake cigars as you would like.
So. Oh, there you go.
So we talked about how popularity, is what pairs them. That's why bourbon is now popular with cigars. Ryes, you're seeing that trend again with cigars and whiskeys. Ryes are becoming increasingly more popular. Nicaraguan cigars are becoming increasingly more popular. Independently, they don't have anything to do with each other. Nicaraguan cigars are becoming popular because the government finally decided to get off its ass and be nice to tobacco farmers, and that's why. Ryes are becoming popular because we're quickly running out of bourbon. But it's also pushed them together as a pairing, which in this particular case happens to work really well. Your ryes, being a spicier nature, hold up with some of those heavier cigars without getting into Maduros, without getting into dark cigars. When I'm saying heavier cigars, I'm talking Camacho's barrel aged, the Opus X by Arturo Fuente.
It is match made in heaven.
Yeah, it is.
Some of those, when I say a heavier natural shade cigar, and those are where the ryes work really well with them. The mellower ryes, like a Sazerac, like a baby Saz, work with just about anything. It give you, again, more playroom. The lower the proof, the wider your scope of cigar choices, by and large. But the Russell's really, Jake's right, is a sweet spot. It is the Russell's Rye pairs really well with Nicaraguan, Brazilian, and Honduran, particularly. Those three regions are growing some phenomenal darker medium shades with some great oily cigars, some great spicier cigars. They are working that end of the spectrum, which goes really well with rye. Balances out bourbon really well, especially when bourbon brings sweetness to it, but really, when we're talking about complementing, the rye go great with it.
So let's talk about I want to try to think of a bourbon that's like super woody. And when I think of like when I'm chewing on a stick, I think of Elijah Craig 20.
Old or like double oak?
I'm talking like Elijah Craig 23 year.
Yeah.
It's like chewing on a stick to me, right? It's like super oaky, right?
Then we're trying to balance it.
Parker's
And,
24.
And Parker's 20. I mean, some people love that, and that's awesome. So like, give me, and that's what I'm doing. I'm going to keep throwing you some of these bourbons because I
Right.
think that's what a lot of people
That one's
really want to
delicious.
know, right?
Going
Like
to
what,
school
like what do you all
here,
think is a good cigar to pair with something like that as well?
So when you get into the extremes like that, now we're going from complementary to balance, because there's just not a lot of. I mean, let's be honest, like an Elijah 23. If I added a Romeo and Juliet Cedra, which is a naturally woody cigar, to that, we are just.
Do you know
chewing
what
on
I
the
would
tree
pair
at
with that? Do you know what I would pair with that?
I'm listening, Jake.
And you might think I'm about to say the Jake cigar, which would go fine. But
It all comes back to
But
Jake.
if I were to sit down with an Elijah 23, I would, knowing that is not a sitting on the shelf at Rite Aid, and it's a fantastic, in my opinion, bourbon, I would grab something I know that it's going to burn well. I know something that's going to have a good build. I know something that's not going to be overpowering. I'm going to go to I'm not going to say what you think.
I think you are.
I'm going to go to a Monte Cristo.
Oh!
I'm going to go to a
A
Monte
big
Cristo. No. I'm not going to go for classic. I'm going to go white label.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to go white label. So I'm going to not go over the top, but I'm going to know that it's going to be a great tasting cigar.
See, the Monte
We were close.
Cristo's the one
What were
that
you
put
gonna
me
say?
over the
I was
edge
going to say a
some-
Davidoff white label. For almost the same reason, because
Honestly, I just didn't think about it.
I thought that's what you were
I would
gonna
have.
say.
You're right. I would go with the Davidoff Grand Cru number 2,
Yeah.
and with that Connecticut wrapper, and it would just be. It would. I might want to have that pair alone. Like it would just be so amazing. It would be.
So when you get into, like you said, the
But we're talking a
extremes-
$30 cigar and a. How much for a shot of?
$250, $250 bottle,
Yeah,
something like
bottle,
that, right?
It's a good night.
So like
if you got,
I mean, how much would that be? In a store.
at a pour at a bar, you're talking $40 probably.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, sure, almost at $100 for one cigar and one drink.
That's a hell of a night.
That's a heck of a night. I mean, it really is.
But so when you get into those extremes of bourbons, really woody, really spicy, really anything, then instead of doing what we normally do, which is complement, you're balancing, and that's why that we both hit on the same thing. That's a great choice, is because you need a cigar that is lighter in body, but the interior construction is a little different. As Monte Cristo and Davidoff's are, they have that Connecticut light shade on the outside, but on the inside they're a fairly stout cigar. They're about as stout as you go with that wrapper on the outside, so it'll hold up to it. And hopefully the lightness, the creaminess of that Connecticut shade is going to add a lot of balance to that, and that's when the balancing act comes in.
Cool. So I got probably, I think, 2 more to throw at you. So there's a huge uptick in finished bourbons.
Oh, yeah.
Port finished,
Angel's
wine
Envy.
finished, Angel's Envy. I mean, you
Sherry,
name it. Like a
yes,
lot of these,
cognac,
a lot of these-
Mead.
yeah, all these kind of like cast different finishes, right? I know we could probably go all day talking about different ones, but kind of let's generalize it as much as we can. What would pair well with something that is a port or wine finished type of bourbon, right? I mean, it's something that's a lot of that is super sweet, has a lot of those, you can definitely taste a lot of the wine characteristics that are coming out of the barrel itself. What's a cigar that would pair well with there? Like, is it spicy or is it medium balanced, or is it?
in my opinion, might be different than
We're going to disagree on this one.
Jeremy's. I'm gonna go with one of those perfect storm Maduros, where it's gonna be a well-aged, like we have one. It's the Punch Grand Cru
Number 2, Maduro.
Number 2 Maduro. It's a torpedo box press, and it's my favorite Maduro. It absolutely is. It is unbelievable as it comes to Maduros, and it has that Java tones, all those deep chocolate, and that's where you're gonna get that kind of pull those sweetnesses together, in my opinion.
And that's a great pairing for a certain time of day. After dinner, after dessert, you'll be on cloud 9
Right.
with a Maduro cigar and a finished
Well, that would be
bourbon.
the only time I would drink a finished.
Right.
Well, it's not hate because a lot of people do like it, but it's
the other and the Maduro will work well. It's going to, like you said, it's going to complement those sort of big fruit flavors, the dried fruit flavors of cherry or plum, and the cigar should add a fair amount of chocolateness to it. The other option is there are some finished cigars that will work well with that. Arturo Fuente makes one called the Anejo, which is finished. The outside wrapper is finished in cognac barrels.
Interesting.
Pair that with a Belmead cognac, and you'll have a great night.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a couple others who are doing that. Hartfield and Company, I believe, is doing a cigar with Gurkha that is finished off in a bourbon finished in port or sherry or something of that nature. But there are a few finished cigars that will go really well with it. If not, Maduro is the.
We had a Gurkha a long time ago. What was it called that actually was finished in
Louis the
Louis
13th.
Trey? Yeah, it was actually finished in those
Things were
barrels, and it
outrageous.
was but they were delicious.
Yeah.
How
They
much
were
were those a
delicious.
stick?
This was
run a
she's
couple
5 years ago.
$100.
Then that was
Ooh.
5 years ago. You can.
So if you believe the marketing hype, and this cigar's gone.
We already said Gurkha.
You'll still find it out in the market. I'm saying, but it's not easy. I don't think it's even being made anymore, but it was.
No, I don't think.
You'll still find them. By the way, if for our dusty hunters, if you like hunting, go to your local cigar store, especially some old guy who's got a shop in a corner somewhere, and just ask him if you can look through the humidor. You'll find stuff in there from the 70s, from the 80s, has some great age on it,
Some plume.
and some plume to it, which is an aged powder on the outside of a cigar.
That's where a lot of people would. So you'll look at a cigar, and a lot of people they won't understand. Especially happens more with the Maduros and such, and the heavier
Oilier
ones.
cigars.
Oilier cigars. They'll have this kind of white-looking substance. Everybody jumps to, it's mold. It's not. It's not. If you see it on the end caps, and you're kind of not in a spot that you think would have plumed cigars, because it does take time. Plume can easily be wiped off, right?
Okay.
So actual mold is going to be, if you see it in your cap and everything, then that's going to be mold. But plume, if you can just easily wipe it off the edge, the
It's a
side of your
fine
cigar,
powder.
a fine powder, then you have a very well-aged cigar.
It's where the oils have
Rabbit.
actually came to the surface. They have crystallized and shattered.
Right.
interesting. I see now you got something else to search for, right? Because I think all Dusties are gone in America, so now you can go Dusty cigar
Right,
hunting.
exactly.
Right? Maybe that's the next big thing. So the last one I kind of want to throw at you in regards to the cigar pairing. I brought out a Tom's Foolery. It's a 4-year, but this is the craft market is growing exponentially. There is so much young aged whiskey on the market today. So like, what's something that you would pair with? I'm not going to say that you want to like take the taste out of something that is young, because you can definitely taste a young flavor. But I mean, yeah, like what can you do to like either make the experience more? I don't want to say more enjoyable, because people are proud of the product they put out. But like, how can you? What would you pair with something that's a younger whiskey, maybe 2 to 4 years old?
We got to get you with some liquor reps. Those complimentary words that don't say this is new make.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
young. It's refreshing. It's vibrant.
It's gonna be good in 4 years.
Yeah,
Right, which is not supposed to say it's going to be good in 4 to 6 years. When you're going into the younger, the 2 to 4 years cigars, truthfully, it can get difficult under sort of real young.
That's what I'm saying. I didn't know what to say. This is all you.
When you get real
I was
young,
going to throw a curveball for
when you
you.
get real young, it gets hard. By the way, the Tom's Foolery, thank you for that. I've been wanting to try that for a long time.
It's good,
I
actually.
really like that.
It's actually one of the better of the young ones that are out there on the market today.
Yeah.
I will say that.
So like bourbons, you age cigars. It's cigar tobacco. And it's aged in 2 processes. It's aged before it's rolled for a variety of time. Sometimes young as 6 months, sometimes as much as 7 years. And then once it is rolled, it is aged again. Sometimes for as short as a few months and as long as a few years.
And a pretty common question we get from people is, how long will a cigar last?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the answer is, as long as you can keep it nice. I have cigars from, that my dad would bring me back from business trips 15 years ago. And I've kept them nice. And I can pull that out. I keep mine where I'm aging them. I keep the humidity a little bit lower. It doesn't, because the only 2 things that can kill a cigar, there's only 2 things. Well, 3 if you include fire. But the 2 that can kill it are being too wet. If it's too wet, it'll mold, right? Or too hot. That's why you never keep a humidor in direct sunlight or anything like that. If it's because this is a really natural product. So there's actually things in the cigar that
It's a living thing.
it's a living thing. And if it gets too hot, then you start to run into the issues where those things that are living in there live and destroy the cigar itself. So if you... And there's a lot of people with lots of theories of storing them in the refrigerator and things like that. Don't ever do any of that. Just, you'd be better off just putting it in a box in a climate controlled place without any humidity, and a Rubbermaid box. But as long as you keep it from getting too hot, which is, over 75, 80 degrees for a extended amount of time. It's not, if you throw it in your golf bag and it's going to sit out for 15, 20, an hour, it's not going to do anything. You're going to then smoke it. It's not going to be a problem. But if you leave it out in the sun for days, weeks, then that's where you're going to run into the issue. Or if it's too wet. Now, too wet, you can destroy a cigar overnight. So basically, the answer is as long as you maintain a cigar from getting too wet or too hot, it can last a lifetime.
Yeah, but the answer to not the question he asked.
Yeah, I know, but it was a side.
I remember
so the question was.
People ask that, right? I mean, people wonder.
The question was younger bourbons, and so I was talking about aging, the age of cigars, and how it is important to maintain them.
Right.
To be fair, but you can balance out a younger bourbon with an older cigar. The problem is you're now spending probably $12 to $18 on a really well aged Perdomo or Padron Anniversary, a great, well-aged 8-year-old bound cigar. It's probably going to cost you $12 to $18 with a bourbon that probably costs you $6 a pour, $4 a pour. And so you could balance it, but the value, right, the value is not there typically. What you can do is complement them and have a little fun with it. You can go with a younger style cigar, or, and he's going to smack me for this, a flavored style cigar. And it's very important to say what a good flavored cigar is.
There are margins in flavored cigars too.
A good flavored cigar is not a White Owl or a Swisher Sweet.
Yeah, I was like,
but there are some great
the cherry,
whole leaf, hand rolled, naturally flavored cigars out there.
CAO
does a whole line of flavored pipe quality style, cherry flavors, bourbon, vanilla, honey. Drew Estate does a whole line of acids, which are botanical flavors. There's several out there. That really those are where young bourbons sort of find their home. You can add some really wild flavors to it, to which, let's be honest, will mask a little of the unsettling flavors of that young bourbon, but will leave some of the more pleasant things, those bright flavors that you kind of like in younger stuff. So that's a good choice. Or younger style cigars. You're not looking for old age cigars, which typically means you're looking for something under $10, something fairly small in ring gauge, something fairly light in flavor.
Absolutely,
those are going to pop with it.
That's a great answer. And there's I think we've ran through a lot of stuff that was on here at the table, a lot of things that I kind of had as ideas, and I think we might finish it up like pouring the Joseph Magnus cigar blend as kind of like capping this off and see like how this is going to work with this, right? As something that was actually made for this. But there's another question I kind of had that was it was always starting in my mind. And this was it was back on one of our earlier episodes with Maggie Kimbrell, and she talked about the Van Winkle cigars, and I see you have one here with us. Now, I want you to be honest here, because you guys are the purveyors of cigars. Now, is it good or is it hype? Because there is a lot of people that spend a lot of money because it has the
sidebar for this,
because it has the Van Winkle name.
What? My answer would be both.
I need to phone a friend.
Oh, that's the political answer.
No, but it's true. I mean, it's made by Drew Estate, so it's got a good build.
That is,
it's true. It's got a good flavor.
It's a good quality cigar.
It's a good flavor, but I'm not going to lie and say that you're not paying
for the Van Winkle name.
For the Van Winkle name, and anybody that would not think that is, a
little crazy.
Right. So you're really just have to determine: are you just looking for a value, or you want to try something that is pretty hard to get? In all reality, and as far as I go, I would smoke it. I have to smoke it to be able to talk about it. But for its price, it's not one that I'm going to sit down
and sit there and really
once
think
a
about,
week and have a Pappy cigar.
I think let me cut to the chase there. Is that there's probably better values on the market rather than just going for the name, right?
There are, but no, you're going to run me into your argument. There's something to be said for a good story. And that is the truth. As much as I rail against it, both in bourbons and cigars, sometimes people want the story.
What are we drinking? That's delicious.
So this was the Joseph A. Magnus cigar blend,
Isn't that delicious?
That is delicious.
Which is a straight bourbon whiskey finished in Armagnac, sherry, and cognac casks. So it is it's a finished bourbon, but in 3 different.
It's an MGP, right?
Of all the things you've had me try, why have you never?
Because we can't get that.
It's
only in Washington,
it's a DC only kind of release.
Weren't you in DC like 3 months ago?
Well, yes, but I don't get to bring back a truckload of bourbon with me.
That all sells out in about a day and a half too,
Right.
in DC. So
It's funny. I went to Jack Rose and I said, "Give me all your bourbon," and they said, "No." Here's a puller of Willet. Enjoy.
You know what? You should have tried harder.
So the Pappy cigar. So I love it, and I have some issues with it. So I'll be honest with you. It is a great flavored cigar, first off. If that band's not on it, it's a great smoke, like most Drew Estate cigars. And I love Drew Estates. I'm a big fan of the brand. They do great flavors, interesting flavors. They do great quality construction, and they have done that in the cigar. It's a good flavored stick. The fermentation process they're using is more unique than the rest of the barrel-aged fermentation. They're doing a couple things differently. The problem I come to is with a little bit of transparency issues.
Here we go with this conspiracies.
It's not.
It's not. It doesn't matter if you're going
the whole bourbon
bourbon
game is.
Yeah,
Right.
I know.
I've done a lot of research, and never anywhere does it tell me this is aged in Pappy Van Winkle barrels. Mm-hmm. Not that it really matters, but it matters when you're paying that premium for it.
Yeah, if you're gonna put the
When you're paying, a couple $100 for a bottle of bourbon or $15-20 for a cigar, I think it sort of matters. That doesn't take away from the fact that it is a beautiful, delicious cigar. But to other bourbon nerds like me, the provenance might matter. And it probably is aged in Pappy barrels. It would make entire sense that it would say that. But it's hard to find a place where it is clearly stated that that's the case.
Right. Absolutely. So the proof is on the label. If it's not, then who knows, right?
It kind of comes back. You weren't there, but when I interviewed Bill and Mike from Delilah's, they were talking about how difficult Pappy and Buffalo Traces made it to know exactly what year Pappies are, what's on the label. And it's why don't y'all put it on there so you can create, that certainty that this is not.
Because we're going to buy it either way.
Right.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
I love this bourbon market, but we're going to buy it. You put Kentucky out there at $300 a bottle, it's selling out. But be honest about it. So why not tell the story of it? The truth is.
But everybody that buys it's going to enjoy it. It's not like people are just going to hoard it away in some shed.
That hurts.
You'd like to think that, but I'm sure it happens. So another question. This comes from Miguel Lucero that put it on Facebook. And this kind of goes into exactly what you're saying with barrel aged cigars. He says I see a lot more barrel aged cigars on the market, and I'm curious for recommendations on some info, the technique on how it imparts the flavor from the barrel to the tobacco. Do they basically just dump leaves in there and roll it around a few? What's the idea?
So
If only it was that simple.
Right.
Yeah.
The quick history of it is this was a process that we used long ago. Caribbean islands would use barrels of rum if it's a particularly dry season and you're needing to ferment your tobacco and you haven't had a lot of rain. You throw it, use rum barrels, and it sweats it. It has waned, ebbed and flowed since then throughout time. About 7 years ago, I believe it was. I forget the name of the company. La Gloria. Maybe La Gloria Cubana, don't hold me to that one. Yeah, somebody did a barrel-aged cigar. This was 7 years ago, and the market wasn't what it was, and so it just didn't go over very well. Delicious cigar, just didn't hit. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen the explosion. Now, see, the truth is, this Pappy cigar has been being made for 9 years at this point, I think. It's been a long time they've been making this cigar, but most of us only think it just came around 2 or 3 years ago. Drew Estates have been partnered with Van Winkle for almost a decade doing that cigar, but it just now hits sort of
popularity,
the market. The barrel-aged cigars right now, the big boys who are doing it really well, is Drew Estates is doing it as well as anybody. They're using a little different process. Typically, you take that tobacco, and we're only talking about the wrapper. by and large. I don't know anybody who's barrel aging filler, which is the middle of the cigar. Everybody's, again, because that's where 80% of your flavor comes from, we're barrel aging the wrapper. It's where we get the most bang for our buck. They set it, fold it into the barrels. They'll sweat it for anywhere from a couple days to a couple months for a minute, and that's your wrapper. Drew Estates is actually cramming that barrel full. According to different press reports, sometimes with a hydraulic jack. They are cramming tobacco in there. And at that point, you are really fermenting tobacco. You're not just aging and sweating. It's a real fermentation process. You're going to break down some chemicals in it at that point.
Ryan, that's an awful nice ash you have.
I know. I'm working on it.
He's about an inch and a quarter right
That shows a well-built cigar.
That's right.
Shows a lot of
It's the
security.
Jakes.
You
I hate to say it.
man.
It's the
I know.
Jakes.
Well, no, I'm talking about his cigar. Will you get your mind out of the gutter, Jeremy?
Camacho, and when we talk barrel aged, keep in mind we're talking about almost any spirit. So there's barrel aged being done with bourbon, rum, cognac, brandy, several different styles. Bourbon being the hot topic right now has taken the place. Camacho does a barrel aged American cigar, which is delicious, which we've got. Which the Corojo is the filler, but the rest of the tobaccos are American tobaccos. There's American and Pennsylvania broadleaf, fermented in bourbon barrels. They do a Nicaraguan rum barrel. Nicaraguan tobaccos finished in rum barrels. Arturo Fuente does that anejo I mentioned, which is finished off in cognac barrels, and that's almost a dessert cigar at that point, especially when you're going into cognacs.
Is there such a thing as a dessert cigar?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Like those ones I would talk about when I mentioned the one that I would pair with
the
port finished Angel's Envy or something. It would be, I consider a dessert cigar one of those great Maduras, kind of wrapping up the night type deal where you have these bold toffee. It's just amazing.
It's funny because I think a dessert cigar for me requires me to come outside on the back porch by myself with a cigar and a bowl of chocolate ice cream and just have to.
That's not terrible either.
Yeah, don't knock it. I mean, don't knock it till you try it.
Again,
Sounds like
if
a
we're
good
talking
pairing.
personal indulgences, bourbon vanilla ice cream with caramel on top of it and a good Maduro cigar. Take it from a fat kid. Then Perdomo is doing the only light shade barrel aged. They're using a Habano. It's called the Habano bourbon barrel aged, but it's an Ecuadorian Connecticut wrapper aged in barrels. The rest of them are pretty dark. The Camachos are very dark, or quite dark, obviously. Now the Pappy Van Winkle is being done with a double style wrap, which Drew Estates is very famous for, which changes the flavor because of two different tobaccos on it, on the foot and the head. But the Perdomo is a barrel aged Connecticut shade, which really is starting to bring.
Are they
up the
barrel
sweetness.
aging both?
They are. The entire
The light
wrapper,
and the dark?
Yeah, is barrel aged in bourbon barrels.
That's interesting. I mean, so I kind of want to wrap this up because I know this has been one of the longer podcasts. So I got one last question, and this is definitely going to be a
I feel like we've just begun.
something. Yeah, I know, right?
I feel bad. That's what I was just thinking.
Something as a newbie
do a
here.
part two.
Yeah, really. We might have to. Something as a newbie, and you only hear it, because people were saying like, "Oh, I'm traveling," and like, "Oh, go pick up some Cubans." Like, be honest. Let's be honest.
I thought you said you want to make this short.
Let's be honest. And this is you guys and your professional opinion. Are Cubans better than this, say, any kind of Nicaraguan or whatever it is?
Till the 60s.
Till the 60s.
Till
Okay.
the 60s.
I'll let you rant on that first.
The only decent cigars made were in Cuba. Mm-hmm. On a mass level, I'm sure that in little pockets there was.
Or the Dutch.
The Dutch, right? But after that, if you exclude the American market, which is what happened, we're gonna figure out a way to get the best, and so because the market's there, so a lot of great people. My guy, Jesus Fuego, he left Cuba. And he comes from a long family of growers, tobacco growers. And he left and he immigrated to, I believe it was Honduras. Stayed there his amount of time where he could get his work visa to come to the United States. And that's where he created his own. So I would put any of his products up against anything that comes out of Cuba. Now, the only thing is, if you get a real Cuban, there's so many fake ones out there.
Most of them aren't.
What? No, most of them are not. Most of
I understand it's the most counterfeited thing in the world.
You step off a cruise ship and you buy a Cuban cigar, 90% chance it's not Cuban.
Higher than that.
I'm being nice. I'm not being a hater. And so, if you get a really good Cuban cigar, in my opinion, some of my favorite Cuban cigars are H. Upmann. Old school brand. And you get some of that salt. You really do. You get kind of some of that overwash that you can only get out of a Cuban cigar, and it can be a great thing. But like everything else, it's going to get to the point where, and eventually the markets are going to open up and it's going to be an absolute nightmare. And the nightmare is going to be because of trademarks. So where we totally cut ties with Cuba, basically they could create another brand somewhere else, mock the entire thing, and...
finally lost it.
Right. And so what happened is that we have Cuban Cohiba and we have Dominican Cohiba. A lot of the branding looks,
Almost all of them.
looks exactly the same,
Right.
but they're
Romeo.
not the same company.
Not close.
So how are you really going to be able to differentiate that? It would be a lawyer's nightmare if it ever happened. Plus,
Payday.
it's a small... Right now, bourbon or cigars are, in my opinion, gaining popularity. They really are. And so to keep up with that demand, and everybody in the beginning is going to say, I want a Cuban. I can get a Cuban now. I want a Cuban. Well, once you start pressing that market where they haven't been accustomed to that volume, that's where you're...
It's
but
just
they're going
like,
to
I
want to
want
be
a
pushing it
Pappy
out.
when
Right.
they need
Is
the
that
bourbon.
is that they're... Well, but Pappy's a little different because I guess, I don't know, but they haven't really compromised quality as much. But I guarantee you... as much...
We'll let the debates go. But
As
anyway,
much,
it's-
okay, how about this? As much as I know that the cigars would,
Right.
it would get to the point where consistency would be an issue, something that they would not let out. Because a lot of things, like with cigars, you have what's called a second. So Monte Cristo is a big one with that. Ashton's one with that. Or Davidoff is a huge one with that. Is that if they have a cigar that has a defect of any kind, they're not going to sell it under their label. Mm-hmm. They're going to sell it under a secondary
different
label.
label.
And so it's a second. So it's where the issues would come where what would now be a Cuban second, they would be very tempted to go ahead and let that go as a first. And you would run into that issue where I don't want that because I don't want to sell an inferior product. I don't want somebody, because we do stand by everything that comes out of our humidor. If you grab it out of our humidor and it falls apart, we'll give you another one, no questions asked, even if you happens light it from the wrong end or things like that.
Never happened.
Right. But we'll stand by it. And I'm scared to death that people are going to go in there, and I know they're going to be pricey, that somebody's going to pay $20 for a Cuban cigar, and it's going to blow up on them, and it's not going to be because of how I held it. It's because they let something go through and counted on that name to carry it.
And
So I'm terrified of it.
So you're terrified of counterfeit and everything that
Everything.
comes to market. But I mean,
And I'm a lot nicer than Jeremy.
Yeah.
Because somebody will come in and say, man, I got this Cuban. And I'll be like, that's awesome, man. I hope you really enjoy it. And he'll just go fake. And I'm just like, come on, man. Like, let them
let them enjoy the
let
moment.
them hope for the best, you know?
At the end of the day,
Give them
and
the placebo
I believe this
effect.
across
Right.
almost all instances.
But I'm a sweetheart like that.
I believe an educated consumer is a better consumer. And I believe that, and that's why I like transparency in bourbon. It's why I like it in cigars. There are a lot of misconceptions about Cuban. Now, to give them the credit to make the compliment sandwich on the front end, best quote I ever heard about Cuban cigars. They're like French Bordeaux's. You will never find a Napa Valley that is as good as the best French Bordeaux wine, but you'll find a lot of red Napa Valley wines that are better than a lot of French wines.
Right.
The best of the best, you're never going to beat that Bolivar or that Cohiba Behiki. Those are the best of the best. And truth is, in my opinion, you're not going to find a Dominican that beats it. That being said, a lot of Dominicans, most Dominicans, beat a lot of Cubans on a regular basis for a lot of reasons. There's a misconception that the Cuban cigar is light and airy and easy, and it's not. And that's okay. I still love them. They are a kick. Cuban cigars typically are not aged real long. One, because of the demand for them, but one, that's the flavor that the Cubans like. They like a stout, high-strength cigar. So they're not aged real long. They're not real mellow. As a matter of fact, when you smoke a Cohiba, I can tell you, even if without the signs of the band or the construction, as soon as I
Smell it.
smoke it, if it doesn't give me a little kick in the chest, it's not a Cuban. Because there's a strength associated with them, and that's okay in the right flavor profile and the understanding of it. The quality construction has become a huge issue. To give you an idea, I love Romeo and Juliet Dominican cigars. I
They're
smoke them
awesome.
regularly.
Super consistent, too.
Out of 20 boxes, I'll smoke. We're talking 400 cigars over the course of several years. I'll have 2 cigars that don't burn well on me. because we regulate, for better or worse, cigars in America to a point of that. I smoke.
Overregulation is becoming a huge issue right now.
We can say that for number 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In Cuba, it's the exact opposite. It's the opposite extreme. There is no regulation at all. There's very little quality control. Now, the Cohiba takes it upon themselves with brand the heritage of their brand to control that quality, but some don't. And so it's not uncommon out of every 5-pack of Cuban cigars that I have one that's just unsmokable. I mean, not 2 inches into it. It's just not smokable. Those are some of the misconceptions about it. And I have a real fear that when they push it, if you try to open up the market, they are just going to shove it to market.
Yeah.
So the short answer, the long-winded version is, if you get a great Cuban, smoke it. It'll be phenomenal. If a friend gives you a Cuban cigar, I've learned from Jake, you accept it and say thank you very much. I'm sure Castro himself handed this out to somebody. Because the intent, and this is back to the fellowship,
camaraderie
of cigars.
and fellowship.
Yeah. The intent is much more important than the quality of the cigar.
Right.
Yeah.
That at the end of the day, that's true. But if we're talking about on its merit, understand what you're getting into with Cubans. Don't go into it with the false assumptions that it's something it's not. It has its own very distinct flavor. And now you have the option now to legally own them, possess them, give them to friends. Unfortunately, not buy them from me. But maybe one day.
Fortunately, right now. Let them figure it all out,
right.
didn't we?
So you have the option of going and exploring with it, but try not to go into it with the wrong ideals.
Absolutely. Guys, that was great. That was a great way to kind of wrap this up. So, last thing I want to let you do, Jake, give a plug for Jake's Cigar Bar, where you're located, how they can
Jake's
find you.
Cigar Bar and Lounge. We have a tremendous selection of bourbons, getting new ones all the time. We even had to rebuild it was a weekend project that Jeremy turned into a 2-month project of turning our stockroom into a bourbon library with the library ladder and all. It looks good now. And so we're forever expanding our bourbon selection. But also, we are a cigar bar. So we have a nice 400 square foot walk-in humidor, like I said, with 500 different options of different cigars that we will tailor to what you're enjoying that night, be it a bourbon, be it. We also have 60 different beers. We have revolving taps, flat screen TVs, big leather lounge chairs. It's the old school lounge like you would think. We are a 21 and over environment because we do not have food, but you are more than welcome to order in food, bring your food, whatever you'd like. We do a lot of events, so make sure you follow us on Facebook because my wife has done a fantastic job creating these event environments where we have food trucks and we have storyteller time. My favorite event we've ever had was with Jimmy Russell and his wife came in, and it was like an intimate storyteller time. And it was unbelievable. So the events are awesome. Other than that, we're open 7 days a week. Follow us on Facebook. You can figure out what we're doing. But it's just a place to kind of unplug, just kind of relax and enjoy life a little bit. And so find us on Facebook, Instagram, all the normals.
Awesome. Thank you so very much for being on here.
Enjoyed every minute of it.
Absolutely. And thank you to all of our listeners that helped actually give us idea. And then somebody gave us idea, and I knew Jeremy worked there, and I said, Jeremy, what do you think, man? And so, Jeremy, thank you so much for stepping up.
Thank you all.
And being able to do this as well. Here. Yeah, making the trek to Louisville, right? I mean, this has been fun. I know there's been a few birds chirping, a few engines rolling by, airplanes going over.
The sun beaming on us.
Yeah,
that's nature.
But we did all right. So
we had a good time.
So everybody make sure, you follow Jake's Cigar Bar and Lounge on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can follow us as well, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, at Bourbon Pursuit. If you also like what you hear, make sure you support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit. We're also open to more sponsors that are going to be going into the 2018 year. So make sure you reach out to us if you want to get your name and brand in front of, 7,000, 10,000 users on a weekly basis, or listeners on a weekly basis. Make sure you go and you talk to us. We'll make sure that happens.
And if you come in and mention anything about Bourbon Pursuit to us,
here we go.
We'll give you 15% off.
Shoot from the hip.
There it is.
Purchase.
There it is.
So that'll help you on your drink every once in a while, on your cigar. You just come in and mention that you heard us on the Bourbon Pursuit, and we'll take good care of you.
No joke. You hyped up these Jake cigars. They're pretty damn good.
They are good.
I would not lie. We were worried about them lasting 10 years and not being able to get rid of them 18 months later. We're waiting on more.
I mean,
That's awesome.
I will say, and I paired it with that Russell Reserve rye. It completely changed the flavor profile of the rye. That it tasted even way better than it does just on its own.
Yeah.
I don't know. You turned me into a believer.
If you ever get a chance, when everybody's traveling, go to your local cigar shops. If they have a house brand cigar, trust me, and this is a story for part 2. there's a lot of love, time invested, much like a barrel pick in a bourbon is invested into these house blend cigars. They really are some of your best value for the buck out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Ryan, close us out, man.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Again, I had a lot of fun and smoked some great cigars. They were
Absolutely.
enjoyable. Much appreciated. And like this show came from show suggestions, so please keep them coming because you all give us the best ideas. Sometimes we run out of them, so we love.
It's very true.
We love your all's creative processes that give us ideas. So.
We have plenty of stories, so have us back anytime.
Yeah, oh yeah, we'll have
we
to do
would
a part
love
2.
to be able to have a time where
Let's do a part 2 there.
I was about to say I would love for you guys. We've done live radio broadcasts from inside of the cigar bar, so we could do it before we open.
Yeah.
Nobody in there, that kind of thing, and it would be
Screw that on an evening. Have a party.
We'll do it. Well, I'm just worried about that. I don't know, interference or something. But yeah, we could do that too. We could start it and then roll it into that. But that's where
I'm looking
for you
forward
guys
to
to
it.
figure
Yeah.
out.
Let's get that on the books. So, I appreciate everybody listening, and we'll see you guys next time.